Another vocabulary strategy of ours, and another acquisition strategy where we're acquiring that knowledge of a concept or terms. And again, one that helps really broaden the depth with which we're looking at the vocabulary words, and by making connections. And so we're going to really begin to understand the name here in just a minute, and what we mean by connections. Just a quick introduction to Connect 10. Connect 10 is utilized to help students develop and progress their academic vocabulary and reading comprehension. And so, again, this is a focus on building that academic vocabulary, helping improve reading comprehension through making connections and providing that, again, that broader context for vocabulary terms. Kind of how we do how Connect 10 helps to broaden that academic vocabulary. We're associating unfamiliar terms and their meanings. So we're taking multiple terms and we're now associating them and connecting them with each other. And thus, solidifying not only kind of the knowledge of what one word means, but then how it's connected to others and relationship between different terms and concepts. Which is going to drive kind of that deeper knowledge of word meaning and how they relate to each other. Some preparation, again, as we're dealing with a vocabulary strategy, you really want to identify those essential vocabulary in a unit. Make sure they're vital to understanding what you want students to really grasp and know, and they're important to understanding those valuable concepts in your unit. We're going to talk, while it does say on the slide to set up the template, and rightfully so, what we do want to focus on is you will be provided with units that you'll have access to at the end of the training, which has a lot of these strategies. They're already laid out in lessons, so please use those. And they've been thought over, and we'll talk about it in the way that this strategy is laid out. It's important how you coordinate the words. So feel free to use that. You will need a text, and we'll talk about this. What I like about a lot of our strategies is that while we may say this one's an acquisition because you're acquiring the knowledge of terms and you're deepening your knowledge of those those essential terms and themes, really they can be used in a variety of different ways. You can really use Connect 10 as an application. It just really depends on how you're using it, and I'll talk about that. But if you're using it where they're acquiring and they're looking at terms and themes for the first time to build that knowledge and relationship to other things, you're going to need a text. Of course, you can use if that information can be, gleaned from a secondary source, a primary source. Either can be used. You just want to make sure that they're able to, that it has the necessary information to make those connections that we're going to be looking at, and then of course it's rigorous enough to push students at the right level. All right. Oh, skipped a slide on me there. What we're going to look at right here is I've got the strategy here for you. This is what a Connect 10 looks like, okay? You'll notice that we have 4 different words, okay, here, or concepts here. This is one, again, that's an 8th grade concept, an 8th grade lesson, and it's the calendar systems. This would be early in the year of 8th grade if you're someone that teaches 8th grade, where you're teaching about how we basically monitor and control and keep up with time, and how we've monitored time and studied it over throughout history and the development of calendars. And so what we've got here is, you'll notice the way this works, and we're going to look at this, we really have a couple of things. So it's called Connect 10 because we're trying to, the goal here is to get to 10 points. And I'm going to explain that in a minute. So how do we do that? So you see the arrows here. And so the easiest connection that you should be able to make for a student would be this horizontal connection right here. So the Gregorian calendar, which obviously commissioned by Pope Gregory and who is a religious leader, and so we're going to get we're going to see that connection there. That should be an easy connection. The use of solar and lunar systems in the Julian calendar, that should be an easy connection. And the text right here that's linked to that the students would use provides the information. So if I were giving this to them for the very first time, it explains what the Julian calendar is. It explains what the Gregorian calendar is. It explains how they were developed. And so they would be able to, again, however you want, you teach annotation. And I really like that because then they can take what they've annotated and then put it in the strategy. So highlight those connections. And that's fine. Some of what you can do, and we want to make sure we understand this. We are not just, what we can do is, okay, maybe they have a definition of Gregorian calendar already. They have a Julian calendar. Maybe they write that here in the box just to, keep some things organized. But what we want here is not a repeating of just the definition. And we're going to show you that. We need to go much deeper. We do not, when we write these relationships, these connections, we do not want to see a repetition of just the definition of a glossary definition. We want to see something much deeper in understanding really how are these two words related? How are these two concepts related? And so we want to keep that in mind. This is not just a regurgitation of definition. We're going beyond that. And so we want to make sure we keep that in mind. But this should be the easiest connection. So this is going to be a 1 point, and I'll show you there's a different sheet for them to write their connections on in just a second. Vertical is worth 2 points, and diagonal worth 3. Easiest connection, okay. A little more rigorous, vertical, should be the most rigorous. And that's how you want to place your terms. And so believe me, if you get to the point where you're using all the ones we've provided, but you maybe even just say you create your own, we're not going to get into a lot of creation. That's how you want to try to sort your words. And it does take time, and you will move them around. We do it all the time as we create them. We'll think it's good. We'll look at it again. Maybe this one needs to be moved here because we're trying to get the right level of complexity in our connections. Okay. But you notice you can connect all of these. Some are harder than others, but the idea is to get to 10. So they don't have to connect all of this. They have to connect enough to add to 10. And so they can choose how they do that, which is great because now you can put them in groups and you can see how different groups maybe make connections and let them share how they make those connections. And then that's great because then if they're putting it up in the room, different students can look at different connections and maybe they saw something that they didn't. And it's just continuing to build that knowledge as not only what we got from the text, and we put on our strategy and our graphic organizer here, but then as we discuss it as a class. So I really like to always put these connections up after they make these because I want them to see the different connections that were made and how people got to 10. And also, if you talk about grading, there's a rubric here, and you can add points to that. Not only was it just did you make the connections, but then I'm going to add points for quality of connection because we're going to talk about that. Maybe I add 4 points, 0 to 4 point scale there on quality, and now I'm grading you on a 14-point scale. 10 of that comes from the 10 connections, and then 4 comes from the quality of the connection. You could add that there, but there is a built-in rubric here for grading, and I think that's very handy in the Connect 10. So kids understand where they're getting their points, but we also want not just about just making connection. It's about the quality of the writing too, and the connection always. So again, keeping those high expectations as we go through this, and we'll look at some things we want to do just to make sure we get that here in just a second. This is the form where they'll write their connections. So you'll notice it gives them the point total over here for each connection. It gives them, and again, 10, and it's any variation of this to get them to the number 10. That they want to. I've given just some examples here. We always want these to be 2 sentences or less. That's kind of the idea here. It's not meant to be super lengthy, and you can grade mine. Hopefully mine are. I passed the test here on the quality, but this would have been a vertical between connecting the Gregorian calendar to the Julian calendar there. That would have been a vertical. It's 2 points. And so it just says the Gregorian calendar uses a 365-day calendar made by Julius Caesar and studied why it was off every 130 years. The Gregorian calendar corrected the mistake of the Julian calendar by creating a formula for leap years. So the Gregorian calendar used the basis of the Julian calendar to create its 365-day system, but then corrected for that lost day with the leap year system. And so, again, it just explains that connection. And it, just to give you, I didn't do a horizontal one here to get to my 10, but I did two verticals and 2 diagonals. This would have been the Gregorian calendar in the solar and lunar systems diagonal connection here, and it was just the Gregorian calendar is only a refinement of the Julian calendar, which used solar and lunar years as the basis for the calendar. So again, connecting, that's why we still have 365 days. The months are dated the way that they are, and all of that is still influencing those. But that's, of course, just a couple of examples, so I don't read through all of them there. But that's what we're looking for. They should, in depth, but in 2 sentences or less, they kind of really they get a quality connection, and we're going to look at a little bit more of that. What we mean by that in just a second, as we talk about as you prepare in your procedures for preparing for this to implement this strategy in your classroom. Now, not to confuse you, what I showed you was with the 4 was the, if you want to say, the basic form of the strategy, but we added an advanced model, which all we've done here is, you notice you've added an extra term in the middle of our diagram here, and now we're making connections from here to here, from trade to Mesopotamian civilization, from religion to Mesopotamian. So we've got more connections to this central theme, this central topic here, and that's that what that does is that requires more out of the students, more connections. Still the goal here is 10, but it's going to require more connections, more thought, a little more rigor in the way this is designed. And so this is a way just to up that a little bit. This is kind of this is a built-in differentiation tool that's been provided here. Obviously, maybe mastery over the basic one before we move to this one. It depends on, again, your students, where they're at. But It like everything, it's going to take some explicit instruction and teaching of this strategy. But a great strategy as far as really building that depth of knowledge. And again, my text, what I'm using, my primary, secondary source should be helping me really build these connections. If this is the first time, if you have already gone over some of this and you want to see, can they take this knowledge we've been going over and apply it further? Again, that's a different way of using this strategy. But this is just the advanced model doing the same thing. And we'll talk about some differentiation in just a second. Just procedures, we want to, with this, again, if you can come up with a generic example, that where I've seen softball used and they had 4 different softball terms, or they put a 5th softball, term in the middle, and they all connected back to that. So that was something that's, hey, they understand that a little bit. That's something a lot of them can connect to, and you can build that foundational knowledge of how to use the strategy. But we want to give some examples of acceptable and unacceptable. Okay, so I want to look at this one. I like this one right here, kind of the relationship to here, acceptable. In some instances, a home with an unattached garage has a patio in between that can serve as a pathway or a place to enjoy the outdoors. One thing a garage and patio may have in common is cement. I mean, that's very basic. That's not a lot of depth. We're not really seeing the true relationship here. This one is the expectation. I think it's important that we show students, what is expected, and what is acceptable, what's unacceptable. So we establish those high expectations when we're going through this. And again, you could add that to the rubric as far as the points you give. Hey, seeing did you get to 10, but that I'm going to add quality of relationship to this. We'll go from there. All right, continuing from just the examples of the quality examples and the acceptable examples and unacceptable examples. Once we've got a good establishment on what that is, and we've kind of been able to do that, obviously we're going to work through the template. Again, there may be some explicit instruction here of I do, and then we do, you do, and maybe you provide the definitions of some of these terms, and then they take it a little further and make the connections with the text. You can do things in various different ways. But obviously we want them to try to have a succinct, like I said, 2 sentences or less, and make those. It's really about the connections here. And again, we're not just repeating the definition. However, in saying that, some of the things we can do for our struggling learners is maybe we allow them to use a portion of the definition to jumpstart some of their connections. We're going to provide several examples, provide maybe the definition ahead of time, and then they're using their knowledge of that definition to then build the connections as they go further into the text they're using and as they get more information. I think, you can use fewer terms. You can divide up. Maybe I want to see, which connection each makes the first time, and you kind of chunk the strategy, as you would say. But I think that's important. Again, we've seen the advanced model for our advanced students. You can add more terms. So it doesn't just have to be one term per square. You could add multiple terms, and they're going to have to make multiple connections. And so I think that's okay, guys. That's Connect 10. Again, strategy that's going to help your students to go further with that vocabulary and really engage and take their knowledge of their concepts much further.